today's business is growth. Now, in a rather sloppy way, one could say macroeconomics comes in two flavors, okay? We either think of the long run stuff, that is perhaps the bigger question, okay? Questions like, why does the average German produce so much more than the average Turk, okay? Or we think about the somewhat shorter run things, that is, why are we better off today than we were yesterday, okay? So the good way of thinking of the following, or the good way of thinking of the distinction is the following. Let's think of GDP per capita, okay? Let's think of GDP altogether, total GDP. And this is time, right? You must have the feeling that it looks something like this. Well, there's a trend, okay? The GDP grows over time. Yes, sir?
Do you have another board mark we can use?
Let's see. We have several. This is better. All right, so this is our trend line. And we're going to formalize this. This says, you know, things get better over time, all right? But do things get better monotonically over time? Is every single year a higher GDP year compared to the previous one? No, right? So the actual GDP looks something more like this, okay? So this isn't so much better. Let's try another one, okay? We're going to call this actual GDP. This is what we've been talking about, right? And we're going to call this trend the potential GDP. We'll define this. The point here is the study of these two things requires different toolkits, okay? One of them is the study of, you know, why are we growing over time? Let's look at the broad picture. Why is Turkey better off today compared to 1940? Okay? That's an important question. That's the question that has to do with this, the trend, right? I could also ask, why is 2009 a worse year than 2008? That says, look, 2008 was something like this. 2009 is something like this, okay? The growth question has to do with the trend, all right? The fluctuations are called business cycles, okay? You're going to hear this often. We're going to talk about the cyclical behavior of the economy. Growth, büyüme. Business cycle, does anyone know what this is in Turkish? This is a tricky one. Okay, dalgalanma, fine, that's the cycle. What's the business bit? So there are two Turkish phrases that cover this. None of them were all that good. Buna bazen iş çevrimi denir. Daha havalı olanı ve aslında daha sık kullanılanı konjonktür dalgalanmasıdır. Konjonktür dalgalanması. Okay, so we're going to do this today. On an average annual basis, who has more income? The average Turk or the average German? That was easy, okay? Why? This is harder. Okay. One answer is population. It's great that this comes up early, okay? The answer cannot be population. because we're talking about the average Turk and the average German, okay? Which country is larger in terms of population, Germany or Turkey? Good, yes. It is true that there are more Germans than there are Turks. In fact, the better statement is there are more people in Germany than there are people in Turkey, okay? But the population answer cannot be right. Who has more income on an average annual basis? The average Turk or the average Chinese? Yes, okay? The Turkish per capita GDP is higher than the Chinese per capita GDP. Now, if it were population, the average Chinese must have been the richest guy in the world, right? It's the largest population. Population helps explain why some countries have larger total GDPs, okay? And that's exactly the reason why looking at total GDP isn't all that good. Because all you're saying is, yep, there's like 1.5 billion Chinese and 70 million Turks, and obviously China as a country produces more than Turkey as a country. But what does this mean about the life standard of the average Chinese and the average Turk?
The labor is cheaper than in Chinese.
Really?
They produce more, but they get less.
Okay, so this cannot be right for the following reason. All right? Good. So, first of all, thank you very much for participating at this early Monday morning. Okay? And you're giving some very useful answers because these are exactly the things that you should be thinking of. Okay? So the question we're asking is, why is it that the average German has more income to spend than the average Turk? Okay? Now, moment. We're not going to use the word money. Okay? Money makes our life difficult because you get confused, right? We don't really care about who has more paper. You don't eat paper. What do you eat? Potatoes. Okay? So let's talk about the potato economy. The whole point here is that the average German gets to eat more potatoes than the average Turk. Is this right? Yeah. When I say potatoes, you should hear more cars, more haircuts, more massages, right? You know, more truffles, whatever. Okay? They have more income to spend. Not more money, more income to spend. Okay? Why is that? Who's talking?
They're more productive.
What does that mean? They're more productive.
Saving resources, the average German can produce more than the average Turk.
Okay, with the same resources, the average German can produce more than the average Turk. Is this true? Is this true? We should think about this a little bit. Yes, sir.
Maybe educated, qualified labor force is more German.
That doesn't sound very wrong. This doesn't sound very wrong either, okay? So now you're saying some very sensible things, right? And the introduction to macroeconomics class is supposed to be this, right? You're going to formalize these sensible things. Now, the point here is we have to do this in the right sequence. The first thing you have to keep in mind is you can only spend stuff. You can only spend on stuff. You can only consume stuff if you produce them. This shouldn't be a big shock to you, right? Let's ask the following. Remember that we get to calculate GDP in two ways, right? Well, three ways, but we're going to talk about the two. One is by expenditure, right? You get to consume. One is by income, right? These two things have to be the same, okay? So, but what does GDP measure? What does GDP measure? Total production, okay? Sloppy but correct answer. Now, if GDP is measuring total production and the total production is equal to total income, right? It must make sense that the average German has more income than the average Turk because the average German is doing more production than the average Turk. Okay? Now, this has to be correct in terms of the GDP accounting, but it also has to make sense to you, right? it has to make sense to you because you've taken, well, all but one of you have taken Econ 101, and you understand that people are paid based on their marginal product. Okay? So what's going on? We're saying, look, the average German has more income because the average German produces more. And this is this gentleman's point, right? It is also this gentleman's point. Now, the question here is, why does the average German produce more than the average Turk? Are you stupid? Thank you. Okay, why? Yes? More income. Okay, but this is the question. Why more income? Because more production. Why more production? Okay, so one thing might be technology. Okay, what else? Ah, okay, so this is a hard one. Yeah, good. So what she is saying is, you know, we talked about this last week, right? You know, I bet the labor force participation rate in Germany is a lot higher than the labor force participation rate in Turkey. So we're thinking of this in terms of population, right? Per person. What if we think of this in terms of per working person? Very good. Okay. So what do you think? If we did this in terms of actual working hours, so we could do this very finely, right? We could ask the following question. Who gets more income per hour of work? The average Turkish worker or the average German worker? Okay? So it can't be participation only, right? Because we're saying even when you participate, in fact, even when you're employed, in fact, per hour of employment, the average German earns more potatoes than the average Turkish worker. It has to be that the average German worker produces more potatoes per hour than the average Turkish worker. Why?
Marginal product.
Okay, but that's the statement. Why is the average German's marginal product higher than the average Turk's marginal product? Are you stupid?
No.
Okay.
They said they are qualified. They have technology.
They have technology, they're qualified. So I sort of perhaps understand what technology is. I don't know what qualified means.
Maybe the organization.
Education, I kind of like this, okay? And this is going to be something important in this class. What else? It isn't just that, okay? Skills, fine. What else? Okay. More. So management itself isn't a thing. Many of you are management students, and I'm sad to say things, but you know, what is management? Think of the production function, okay? We're saying the average Turkish worker produces less per hour than the average German worker, right? So the points that came up were, well, the average German is more skilled, okay? The average German uses more technology. There's one more important bit here. Who has access to more machinery, the average Turk or the average German? Is this not important? If you're doing production with, say, a shovel, okay, correct. And the average German is doing production with a, I don't know what, Caterpillar machine. Who's going to be more productive per hour? This isn't too hard, right? But now you should get some feeling that, you know, this 102 lecture is good for something, right? I mean, we're asking a very, very basic, big, deep question, okay? Why doesn't the average Turkish worker, why doesn't the average Turkish worker get as much income as the average German worker, okay? The first answer you have to be able to give is, look, this is not just an income question. This is a production question, okay? Income is production distributed across people. If we're saying the average is low, the total has to be low. We're not producing enough, okay? Now, what we're saying is total output, GDP, is produced, let's call this the macroeconomic production function. We won't even bother to write this out, okay? We just want to say, you know, look, there's this black box process. You put in stuff, out comes the GDP, okay? What are the stuff that you put in? What goes into the production of the GDP? consumption doesn't produce GDP. Okay? Again, some of you have taken Econ 101. What do you use to produce stuff? Okay, intermediate goods. Intermediate goods have to be produced as well, right? Those are intermediate goods too, okay? Labor, that's one thing, okay? Everything is produced by using labor and capital. Natural resources are there. You have to take them out. How do you take them out? Okay? What else? So we're going to say, look, there are two more things. One of them is, think of two people who have exactly the same access to capital. Okay? They're using the same machinery. All right? Are we sure that these two people will produce the same amount? There's no reason why that would be the case. Okay? Okay, skills. So we have a very precise definition of these skills. Okay? We're going to call this human capital. Okay? Human capital is labor, but it's a qualification of labor. Remember that some of you were saying skills, qualification, okay? That's what it is. So when we say labor, we're really just counting heads, okay? How many people worked? How many arms and legs do we have around? Okay? Now for some jobs, that's all you need. Labor. For most jobs, that's not good enough. What really matters is what qualifications this labor has. That's the human capital. Do you know what this is in Turkish? İnsan sermayesi, beşeri sermaye. Okay? And this is something that you should really, really, really, really be comfortable with. This is something deeply important for our country. Okay? There's one more thing. That's it. The macroeconomic production function is what takes the total labor, raw labor, arms and legs of the country, and the total capital of the country, and the total human capital of the country, combines it with technology, and produces GDP. Now, surely there's no such thing, right? There are a lot of small production functions. Each firm has a different production function, okay? However, this is an extremely useful conceptual device. It helps us think, all right? It helps us say things like, look, the Chinese GDP is going to be higher than the Turkish GDP because this is huge in China, okay? Well, what does it say about the average Chinese worker? Nothing, okay? So better would be to write this. Let's write this in terms of per capita GDP, okay? Is f of per capita capital, right? Per capita human capital and technology. Technology is the same, right? Whether you're using it for one person or 50 people. Now, it should be clear to you that this was the question we began with. The average Turkish worker's income is the average Turkish GDP. Assuming that all Turks are workers, okay? Now, let's look at this. Let's think of the following. We're saying this thing is higher in Germany than it is in Turkey. Good. Which component is higher? I'm sorry. Does the average German have a higher or a lower capital per worker? Okay, so Germany has this one that's higher. What about this? Does the average German has a higher human capital? Okay, I'm going to believe you, but do you really know what this thing is? So let's come back to this, right? Think about this a little bit, but you have this feeling that the average German worker is more skilled, but you cannot articulate this. You can't just say this right. Okay? So I'm going to give you the tools to do that. Technology is the following. Assume that the average Turk has the same capital, okay? But now capital is just raw capital, machine, Okay? You know, 1 shovel each. They have the same skills. Would the average Turk produce as much as the average German? Okay? If the answer is no, it has to be that, okay, the average German knows something the average Turk doesn't know. He's using a better technology, or she is using a better technology. Okay? So this technology term here captures a lot of things. Okay? We're going to call everything that we don't understand technology. We're saying, look, it has to be capital. It has to be labor. It has to be human capital. Those 3 things are not enough to explain everything. Something else is going on. Right? We're going to just dump it into technology. Let's talk about this properly now. The really important bit here, for my purposes, is human capital. This is what you mean by skilled labor, qualifications. Okay? Now, if you think of human capital, the thing that you should consider is the following. Not all labor is created the same. This should be very natural to you, right? You know, you had haircuts. Were all your barbers equally good? You have preferences, right? You go to this guy, but not that guy. Okay? Well, they both have a pair of hands. Okay? They both have scissors, and that's about what a barber needs, right? Why aren't all the barbers the same? Okay? So we're going to put that in human capital. It's the skill. Okay? How do you acquire skill? Very good. Very good. We think of this in 2 ways. One of them is schooling, education. Okay? The other one is on-the-job training. Okay? These are the good phrases. Schooling, education is, you know, you sit down and I tell you of macroeconomic fundamentals. You should have now a new perspective on what the hell you're doing here, right? You're increasing your human capital. You're moving away from being a pair of arms and a pair of legs and into being skilled labor, okay? You could have gotten a job when you graduated from high school. You could have gotten the same job when you graduate from Bilkent. In which case would you be paid more? Okay? Why? Why does someone pay you for your Bilkent diploma? It has to be the case that you're going to be more productive after 4 years here. Why are you more productive? You're increasing your human capital. Okay? Now, so the Turkish words for these are very good. Mektepli, alaylı. Okay? That's what it is. You could learn by going to school, you could learn by doing it, and you could learn both ways, right? You go to school, and then you do the job. Consider this. 2 miners, okay? They both work at the same mine. One of them has just begun to work. The other one has been working there for, say, 25 years. Which one is paid more? Assume they have the same human capital. Which one is paid more? Ah, not right. Assume they have the same schooling. Which one is paid more? So the guy who has more experience is paid more. Why? You know this, right? More senior people are paid more. This is generally the case. Is that because we just like senior people? Okay, that's the whole point. This is what economists should have taught you, right? Taking a semester of 101 should have taught you. You pay people their marginal product. If somebody is being paid more, that person's marginal product has to be higher. So the general statement here is that more senior people, more experienced people have higher marginal product. Why? They learn how to do it by doing it. Okay? Regardless of how much schooling you have, experience really matters. If you were here like 5 years ago when I was teaching this class for the first time, yeah, you would have known. Okay? Now you're going, let me consult my notes. Okay? This matters a lot. This also matters a lot. Now, you told me that the average German has higher human capital. Which one is higher? This is tricky. Are you telling me that the average German has been at work for a longer time? Okay, which one is higher? Look, this is something that is very important for us. Okay, that's very important to learn Turkey. And that's very sad. What is the average educational attainment of the average Turkish worker? That is, how many years of schooling has the average Turkish worker had? Okay, so this 8 number comes up very often because we have 8 years of mandatory schooling. Okay? But it can't be right. Because look, we've been having this 8 years of mandatory schooling for, what, less than 10 years now, right? I think this is right. It used to be 5, okay? And it used to be 5 without strong enforcement. People dropped out of school at 2nd grade. I'm asking you about the average Turkish worker. The average Turkish worker is some guy who is 47 years old. Okay? Surely he hasn't been to school for 8 years. Or has he? I can confidently call him a he because we know that women in Turkey do not participate in the labor force. Okay? The average guy is a guy. Now, that guy, how much schooling does that guy have? The answer is not 8 years, not even 8 years. Okay? So it's been going up, and the statistics on this aren't quite as good as they should be, but the latest thinking is it might be as high as 6 years. Okay? For the average German, I'm going to argue that that's going to be something like 13 years. Does it matter? Yeah. Okay? So this is telling you that, look, your average Turkish worker is someone who can essentially read and write, but can't do much more. Okay? That doesn't quite cut it in the 21st century. Okay? That doesn't cut it in the following ways. You get the best machinery. The best machinery is something that comes with a computer. All right? You give this machinery to this guy. What does he do? He probably cries, right? I mean, what do you do with a computer if all you can do is barely read and write? Okay? But that's exactly the point. Even with the same capital per worker, the average German will produce more because that guy has been schooled in using the damn thing. We aren't. Okay? Now think back to the statement that you've been hearing for the past, 18 years of your lives. Eğitim her şeyin başı. That's what it means. Okay? Now, schooling is important. On-the-job training is also important. We do a lot of this in Turkey. In many countries, in fact, Germany is the case in this one. This is much more institutionalized. Okay? That is, once you get a job, they actually do consciously train you to be better. Most of the time in Turkey, you just have to do it and do it wrong and then be slapped on the head and then do it right. Okay? It takes a long time. But this human capital business is extremely important. Okay? One of the reasons why it's so important is this is a policy option for us. Okay? Say the average German, I'm not entirely sure of the number, but this should be about right. Say the average German has 13 years of schooling. Right? How much farther can you push this? Can you send the average guy to school like 15 years, 20 years? At some point, enough has to be enough. Okay? I mean, I've been to school for 25 years, and it really was enough. But what about the average Turk? Can you push this guy's schooling up? 6 is too low, right? If you're able to push this up, are you going to push output per capita and income per capita up? Yes. So this says, look, this is an important policy tool for us. Okay? Educate people Education is good for you. It's good for your soul. It's good in many, many, many, many respects. It makes you a better human. It also makes you a better producer. Okay? You become richer for that. Good. Now let's think of the technology. Technology essentially is the knowledge of how you do production. Okay? You take the worker, you take the human capital, you take the physical capital, you put these together. Out comes the GDP. Is there a single way of putting these together? You could do this in many ways, right? There are many ways of teaching the 102 class. The university has the same classrooms, okay? That's the capital. It has the same number of people who could teach 102. That's the labor. Those people are the same people. That's me, for example. I have the same human capital, okay? But this year, I'm teaching the class better. Why? What improved? A tiny part of that is on-the-job training, right? I had a bit more experience in doing this. A big part is I redesigned the class, okay? I've changed stuff that I teach in class. I've changed stuff that you should read from the book. I changed stuff that is in the homeworks, blah, blah, blah, okay? That's what technology is. Same guy, same human capital, same physical capital, more output. How did that happen? Technology improved, okay? Now we get to talk about, this is something about the level, right? Why does the average German produce more than the average Turk? We could also ask the growth rate question. Whose production is increasing faster? The average German's production or the average Turk's production? This is less obvious, right? I mean, it's clear to you that the average German has more income than you do. Okay? Therefore, the guy has to be producing more. But is the distance increasing or decreasing? Whose growth is faster? Okay, Turkey grows faster on average. Okay? Last year, we shrank more than Germany. Right? But on average, we grow faster. Why? Why? The answer has to be there, right? What is growing? That thing. Output per capita, right? What is growing? Output per capita is growing, right? This is the growth question, okay? How could this grow? Well, either this grows, or this grows, or this grows. That's not too hard. So which one is growing? Somebody's mumbling all of them, and that's the right answer. Okay? All of them. Look. Who has more capital? The average German or the average Turk? Okay. Let's say you had one more unit of capital to give either to the average Turk or to the average German. Who would benefit more? Who would increase his production more? Who could reward you more for this? The average Turk. Okay? Human capital. Whose human capital is increasing faster? It has to be ours because ours is low, okay? It's hard to increase the average German's human capital because the guy has already been to 13 years of school, blah, blah, blah, blah, okay? Compared to several years ago, our schooling attainment is higher. We're increasing this. That's going up. What about this technology? This is trickier, okay? But we're catching up. Let's do this right now. Let's formalize this properly. We're going to say, look, let's say we have capital per worker here, okay? And output per worker here, okay? What does the relationship look like? Well, it should start from the origin, right? If you have no capital to produce with, you produce nothing. That was easy. As the capital per worker increases, should we increase output? Yes, that was easy too, okay? This is a point here. Now, here's the good question. Let's say we're here, Okay? Output per worker increases. So we started from here. It's now here. Where would... So we could be, I don't know, here, here, here, or here. These are points A, B, C, D. Okay? Which point do we expect to be? Okay, so if it's A, it means as capital is increasing, your output is just going through the charts, right? It's increasing like this. Okay? B and C say, well, it's probably more like this. Okay? And D says it's actually decreasing. Well, it's probably not decreasing, right? When you give someone more capital to do production with, at worst, they're not going to use it. Okay? But they're not going to decrease the output. B and C tell you something that you should know from 101. This is called, help me out here. You have a firm, okay? The firm has a capital stock. You incrementally increase the capital stock, okay? Let's say the worker who has nothing to produce with. Let's think of this guy, right? You give this guy a shovel, correct? His production increased. You give the guy one more shovel, okay? Would his production increase? Well, maybe, probably, okay? But this is the key question. The key question here is, would the increase in production be as large as the increase in production that was caused by the first shovel? Does the second shovel add as much as the first shovel? No. There's a name for this. Diminishing returns. Thank you. Okay? That's what diminishing returns is. It says your production doesn't skyrocket. It increases, but increases at ever slowing rates. Okay? So we should take a break here and be back in 5 minutes.